good afternoon and welcome to today's edition of The Full Scottish. Joining me today are playwright and novelist Peter Arnott and actor, writer and teacher Libby McArthur. So we are going to have a fairly strong arts and cultural theme running through the programme today. But before I get to that and other stories in the news, I will, as usual, give you the updated figures for coronavirus in Scotland. This is the status as of 2 o'clock yesterday. 1,753 new confirmed cases of COVID, 78 new reported deaths of people who had tested positive. Since the start of the pandemic, a total of 1,487,274 people have been tested. That's nearly a quarter of the population. 1,326,282 are negative, which leaves a positive total of 160,992. As of last night, 1,863 people were in hospital, 145 of whom were in intensive care. And sadly, we passed the 5,000 mark of deaths last week, and now 5,305 patients in Scotland who have tested positive have sadly died. And of course, there are others who have died where COVID has been mentioned on the death certificate. These are pretty sobering figures, which is why, of course, we went into new regulations this week. There were 6 new regulations announced by the First Minister at the same time as a ramping up of the vaccinations. Have either of you been vaccinated?
No. In fact, I was just talking to my dad this morning, and his GP practice have just phoned him and asked him if he's able to get down there, and he said
good.
yes.
Yes, yes,
So yes, anytime.
Just whenever you want me. Okay, and obviously
Yes, exactly.
Saturday saw this massive testing in vaccination in Glasgow of 5,000 health and social care workers at the Louis Jordan Hospital. It looks amazing, actually, I have to say. So it does look like we are going to be on target for the vaccinations that Jean Freeman has been speaking about. But the new regulations, I didn't think they made very much sense. Did either of you have an opinion on them?
Well, I'm afraid I can't speak for Libby, but it's a blur. There are so many regulations and coming in so often that I find it very difficult to keep up. So I actually I'm afraid they leave me kind of cold. I mean, it's a very personal thing, but I haven't really altered very much. Just keep away from people and as much as possible, basically.
I would agree, and I think that's the point, that there seems to be all this additional information coming out, and it is confusing. The one that got me was not being able to have takeaway pints in the street. I didn't think you could do that anyway. I thought it was illegal to drink in the streets in Glasgow, and I wasn't aware. I haven't seen lots of people walking about with pints in the street, but maybe somebody said it was happening in Partick. So there you go.
I think we're in the majority when we were aware of that blurriness, but I don't think it's an accident. It seems to be like, my son's very, very clear that I ought to know everything that's going on. So every 2 minutes he's sending me a text, so this morning he let me know that B&Q, in case I was going to jump up there today and get a pot of paint, he let me know that B&Q is shut down because they've found one of their folk serving there has COVID. But for me, I think what we've got to understand is a kind of dynamic is that any kind of information that we're getting through social media or in the news is often tilted to bad news. We know any journalist will tell you if it bleeds, it leads. So I think there's a certain kind of self-preservation that's keeping away, I know I am, from the exact details every day, daily, because there isn't a balance. There isn't. We're not given, not even in Channel 4 News, we're not given, and here's some relaxing music, and here's a wee bit of Chi Hong, alongside the 5,000 deaths. And so to a certain extent, there's so much of this that the individual is carrying, not least financially.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, as I was coming to the studio this morning, felt so sorry watching all these restaurants and coffee shops that are still doing takeaways having to haul their tables to the doorways to now sell their burgers and their coffee. I went yesterday to a local small coffee shop that I frequent just to give them that kind of support. And I thought, if stuff isn't hard enough for you, you've got to stand and freeze yourself in this doorway to serve me a brownie and coffee. It just seemed a bit
But isn't it
tough.
amazing, Maggie? Isn't it amazing, the queues? Like, I'm very blessed. I live on the beaten track. There's a cafe at every corner in my street. And the queues, because people are desperate to have some sort of normality.
Yeah.
It's almost like to be a consumer is to have some sort of value of your day, It reminds me of, it's like, I don't know, it's just that it's almost a wee bit rebellious. I will wait for an oat milk latte, even if it's raining.
Yes, well, that's what I did. I ate my brownie in the pouring rain. And I posted on Facebook this week, and it got huge impact of all the things I post, all the deep, sensible wisdom I post. I posted that I was going to the fish man to buy fish because he was a real human being that I could have a conversation with. And I got an amazing response. Good fish as well.
No, I think that there's two things going on with government regulations. One is to do with trying to control the pandemic, but the other is to do with managing us as we all go slowly mad. So that they have to, in a way, I feel that the constant stream of new regulations and new ways of doing things is partly to keep our minds active. I think in a way it's I find it strangely therapeutic to be, but every normal activity is now like it used to be, going outside your front door for a cigarette every kind of 25 minutes, like I used to. But now buying and selling coffee is this kind of almost illicit activity. So it's a strange way that we all have to manage ourselves. And I don't know. I just keep getting the impression that in the few social contacts that are remaining to me, that people are getting slightly odder all the time. I know I am. I'm getting
absolutely.
I was a bit odd to begin
But
with.
I wanted to ask that question. I mean, there was never any. We were never going to get back to normal after this 3-week lockdown after Christmas. It started on Boxing Day. Everyone knows that. Schools were never going to go back at the beginning of February. Everybody knows that. Would it not be better just to say, look, it's really out of control. We've got to get the vaccination programme rolled out more extensively. It's another 3 months. Telling you now, deal with it, get on with it, rather than this drip feed. What do you think that would have a more positive impact on people, or would that just make people give up?
I think it's very hard to tell, but I think that I think they have a dilemma about that as to whether they. But I think that's what everyone actually thinks, that the vaccination is going to take as long as it takes, and until that's happened, then we can't really even think about what normal might look like.
No, that's true.
Conversation where folk are kind of going, will it be September? Will it be June? Will it be July? Everybody's looking, when will I be back at the GFT? When will I be back in the theatre? When will I have my friends round? I don't think, Maggie, it would be good to do the 3 month. I kind of agree with Peter that there's something, I'm a bit kind of schizophrenic about it. As much as I remain outraged that my life has been robbed from me, I still think that this kind of piecemeal, incremental guidance is almost like our Scottish Government trying to stay ahead of human nature. The bit of us that, the bit of us that wants to push the boundaries, the bit of us that stands in the middle of the pond because it's frozen. Why would you do that just because you can? The bit of us that wants to go to the moon. It's like the Star Trek bit of us go where no man has gone before. It's like I do feel a wee bit kind of like Peter was saying, it's almost comforting, the wee scolding. Like as much as I'm in a tantrum and kicking chairs, going, I want to go to B&Q. I want to walk with 2 friends.
Exactly. Someone said to me that we were being treated like children, and I said, I wish we were treated like children, because if I was a child, I'd be able to go to the swings with all my pals, not just the one. And like just you, I can't wait. My walking group, we're now walking just one at a time with each other. It's nearly not the same. Anyway, we'll move on. So from the chaos that COVID is causing us, it's nothing really in comparison to the confusion and chaos that Brexit is causing. This week's been dominated by stories affecting the Scottish fishing industry, in particular the seafood industry. As most viewers will be aware, the vast majority of seafood fished off Scottish waters doesn't stay in the UK, it goes to Europe. And of course, it's being held up at borders and it's rotting. There were suggestions they were going to dump the rotting shellfish at number 10. They haven't done it. What a shame, really. That might have been a good photo opportunity. Yeah. But it's more serious than that. One fisherman said that he would normally sell £1 million worth of shellfish a week. And last week, he sold £12,000. Now, that's not sustainable. Fishermen are going to go out of business. And there's not the market at home for shellfish to the same degree. So what should the government be doing about this, Peter?
The Scottish government, again, there's a kind of limitation, of course, as to what the Scottish government can do, and again, we've become used to over the last few months the UK government and the Scottish government applying sticking plasters to things, so that in a sense, the COVID reflex of putting a plaster on the wound that's been caused is the first kind of reflex, but. What really strikes me the most is that it's the Brexiteers, the people who wanted Brexit to happen, did so apparently without a moment's thought as to what it might actually mean. That they signed a trade deal and are completely surprised at the terms of the deal they've been negotiating for the last 4 years. So that. Not just the red tape, which is making fish rot, but the fact that when the fish, even if it got to the European market, is going to cost something like 30% more because of the charges that importers are going to have to pay to take care of the additional red tape of our no longer being in the single market. So even if they could get the fish through, nobody might buy it. These things work very, very fast. So just as Scottish fishing boats are landing their catches in Denmark, because that's a way of getting the stuff onto the European market. And again, how much longer will the EU say, well, wait a minute, you can't do that. You're a UK registered boat. How come you're landing your stuff in Denmark to sell it to Paris? And as you're right, it's just not sustainable. But it was all terribly predictable, and in a sense that the temptation to say "I told you so" is so enormous that it's very hard to see past it. But
I think the thing that surprises a lot of people who were saying, well, can't be sold to langoustines, can't be sold to southern Spain. We'll just sell them in Tesco's in Maryhill. But the point is, there is no supply chain. Supermarkets are not geared up in order to be the domestic market for shellfish or a lot of produce in the UK. And that's not going to change quickly. We almost need an entire shift in our buying patterns. And if you can't get the produce to market through the supermarkets, there's not really any other way. Sure, we could see more farmers' markets, fishermen's markets, local produce selling. But that isn't really the answer, is it, Libby?
Not at all. And I think Peter's dead right about it. It's depressingly predictable. And the reason for that is because an idea doesn't leave its source. This seed was sown by two bullies fighting against each other, trying to be Prime Minister. And, they appeal to the lowest common denominator in all of us. Way back, this notion of Brexit with no finished off thinking. And then it's a wonder that the reality at the end of it is rotten fish. I've always said that because our access to Europe was London-centric, I've always said maybe the radical shift is to stop looking down and start looking up and look towards our Scandinavian cousins. Look up to those connections up there. And if that's a way to get to Europe, then
I think that whole Scandinavian link is very central to quite a lot of thinking within the independence movements. It underlines an awful lot of what Leslie Riddick writes about and broadcasts about, and the idea of these small nations. And obviously, the comparison with
how they
Norway
work.
in terms of the size of the population. Norway are not in the EU, but they are in the European Economic Area and whatever. I think that is established. And I would hope that once independence is granted, or we take independence, whichever way you want to look at it, and we are able to negotiate rejoining the EU in some form, that we do look to our Scandinavian neighbours for
But
inspiration
Maggie, also,
and ideas.
I think the idea of established, where it's not established, is in the Scots' mind. There's obviously the independent movement is a fascinating broad church, but I just wonder if there's just a bigger conversation that needs to keep rolling out about ourselves as a nation, because it's been it's been hundreds of years that we've been in this union that wasn't working for us. And it's this thing of even to the extent that the British thing, even sometimes when I fill in an application form and there's no way for me to say that my nationality is Scottish,
Yeah.
there's still a bit where it goes,
Yeah, that
I'm
drop down
not saying I'm
menu
not
on
British.
computers, and there's never it's very rarely do you find Scottish or Scotland. Occasionally you do, but very rarely. The other
Very
big
rare.
Brexit story that broke this week is the fact that in 2 years' time, the last of the European Social Fund money will be coming back to the UK. And that's been a really important fund for Scotland. There's a Highland part of it and Lowland and Uplands part of it, and it's been absolutely crucial in maintaining jobs and services. That will go, and it's going to be replaced by something called the UK Prosperity Fund. This week, the British government admitted that the devolved administrations will not be involved in the distribution or management of that money. Now, in my day job, I'm a recipient of ESF and have been for years. And I've been saying for 4 years that this was on the cards because I knew someone who was advising government on this. That wasn't what she was advising them to do, but she was telling me that this was going to be likely. This has real ramifications for Scotland because what they'll be doing is what they're called levelling up. So they're going to look at the major cities and areas in England who haven't been able to get European funding for all the various rules and reasons for that, and making sure that they now get a slice of the cake, which inevitably means there'll be less for Scotland. And it's clearly a political move that they don't want the devolved administrations involved in the distribution or the management of it. But there's a real sense that Scotland will lose out. And we've been asking for clarification on it. Our budget is 2 weeks away and there's nothing coming out. That's another real blow. We might just be beginning to get the economy up and running again after the pandemic, coming to terms with the Brexit fallout, and we get a double whammy where crucial money that would replace European money is not going to come to Scotland. And that's a real shocker. And the public tend to look at that kind of European money as thinking, well, it's not important, it doesn't really affect us. But actually, it's crucially important. It's crucially important for the third sector. It's crucially important for the public sector. And it's one of these stories that interests people like me who are political geeks, but isn't really getting out there to the public. Were either of you aware of this, for example?
Yes, but only because I'm a political geek as well. So in a sense, the symbolism of the Union Jack being slapped all over every penny of government spending, including on vaccinations, including on this new replacement for European money. Has always been part of the agenda, it seems, and is going to very much be part of the agenda as we come up to the May elections. That everything that basically we're going to have a competition between the Tory case that everything good that happens in Scotland is down to them, and the SNP saying everything good in Scotland comes down to them, and it's going to be enormously tiresome, I have to say, on both sides. But I suppose because of my own prejudices, mainly on the Union Jack being slapped on everything is problematic. But yes, absolutely. So, but I'm aware of it, but only because of that, and because the deeper point I wanted to make is that the devolution settlement was made with the assumption of shared EU membership between all the four nations of the UK. And so therefore, Britain no longer being part of that European Union does unpick devolution in ways that I think this is, we're only scratching the surface of just how much is going to change. And in a way, the unitary British state, which has never really existed in the way that of Tory fantasy, any more than the Britain, England standing alone in 1940 ever really existed. That fantasy, which guides UK government policy at the moment, is going to have profound effects on not just at a policy level, but also on quite an existential and identity level. That Scottishness and Europeanness, lots of the things you were talking about the Scandinavian connection, they're all tied together. Everything is tied together. And that's why I think these upcoming elections are possibly the more important even than the independence vote in 2014. I really think we have to making decisions about who we are and where we're going.
Well, I would agree that this election is probably more important than 2014 because obviously the ground has shifted hugely under everyone's feet since then.
I also think you have to approach it in a totally different way as well, because we have to. I mean, I love the idea of you being political geeks, but one of the good, the gold in them, their hills, if you like, is that people are becoming to be naturally politicised by all of this. I mean, the Tories that are there are no more Tories than Trump's a Republican. They're right-wing anarchists, and we need to be savvy to the kind of dodginess that's, all the stuff that's been happening in the background. Folk are now kind of going, so what happened while we were doing Christmas and COVID? While we were feeling really disempowered with our masks on and being in the house, what law was it they put? I read up about the Good Law Project. There's a Freudian slip, good law project, and there's a lot of things happening that are not having it's like presidential government, that we're not having those collaborative discussions, and I think the new task force, everything we're going to start talking about going up to this election in May
let's talk about the new task force. So Keith Brown's just announced the new independent task force is going to be created within the SNP, really as a policy forum to help shape the agenda and debate for independence. My first thought was, because it's going to be embedded within the SNP, is that going to be a help or a hindrance to grassroots movements who may not be politically aligned to the party? What do you think, Libby?
I don't think it's important whether you join the Scottish National Party or not. I think one of the great things about and why I'm a party member is because they're doing the thing that I think effectively any good teacher or leader or commander-in-chief or someone with insight does. They're making themselves redundant. If you're interested in Scottish independence, then you're interested in something that's really natural. And if you want to join the Scottish National Party, I wish the name was different. That's brilliant. I think personally Nicola Sturgeon is a master politician. I think she's brilliant. But the point of it is your own kind of sense of your identity and what you stand for. And I think the Scots have a way of looking at themselves in the world that is really helpful and leading edge. And even something as simple as friendliness is a really sophisticated way to be. When we're in a world just now where the dominant story, and I don't know if you agree with this, Peter, being a great storyteller yourself, but they say that folk get the face they deserve. Well, I think we get the stories we deserve. And what's happening just now is the story is destroy or be destroyed. And if we carry on that story,
that's pretty strong.
Look what's happening in America. We can't go about clubbing all these guys that stormed, DC. We have to lead them gently away from Trump, going, look, I know you really love him and you adore him, and they do. They love him. We can't underestimate how much they love him. So it's really a new approach. But the bad othering is what's getting us into trouble, And so
what I was trying to get at is there have been fault lines between the grassroots movement and the SNP party. There are people within the
Yeah, for
grassroots
sure.
movement, important people with loud voices, who take a lot of issue with the current SNP leadership and the party. So the announcements of this task force, which is SNP based, is that going to be a bit of a red rag to a bull to others in the Yes movement who think actually it's about the grassroots? Because let's face it, it was the grassroots work, of which I'm sure we were all involved, that made that massive difference to the turnout and the vote the last time. So Peter, what do you think? Do you think this is helpful or a hindrance, and how's it all going to fit in?
I think they have to keep some kind of momentum going from the top. I think that's really what this is mostly about, so that they can be seen to be doing something. But they have a real problem. They have the problem of being so electorally dominant that they have no opposition. And as every politician or historian knows, that if you have no effective opposition from outside your party, one will emerge within your party. It just happened to the Tories. I mean, Brexit is the result of it. This in the same thing is happening, I think, within both within the SNP as a party, organizationally speaking. You have a territorial tussle going on, which is all about a succession which isn't even happening yet. I mean, it's amazing. People are having really bitter, nasty dogfights about something that's years down the line. Because everybody knows that Nicola Sturgeon is around for as long as she wants to be, because she's so in a sense you have and maybe it's partly to do with the pandemic, maybe it's partly to do with Twitter bubbles, but there seems like an awful lot of heat being generated for no real reason, no connection to the public, no connection to the voters, but within the kind of narrow bubble of the kind of nationalist sub-community, if you like.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that that's what the majority of voters are interested in or want to know about. And not that I'm a conspiracy theorist at all, but the muttering of fifth columnists has been heard. One of the things that Keith Brown has said, though, is that this is going to be an opportunity for input into policy. So you both work in the theatre. The theatre has been probably the most decimated industry since the pandemic. Certainly in Scotland, it's just stopped altogether. At least in England, there's been little pockets bubbling up. If you had your chance to put policy recommendations to the Scottish Government about how the Scottish theatre industry needs to recover post-pandemic, what would you tell them? I'll start with Peter and then I'll come to you, Libby.
Well, I think that we have an opportunity, in a sense, in a strange way, because everything is in suspension. We have an opportunity to look at the fundamentals, to first of all consider Scottish theatre as one collective enterprise. That here we are, it's a comparatively small country, comparatively broadly spread, and it really isn't rocket science to have a kind of locally led well-being economy, place-based economy view of our communities and what they need and what they want, and what our artistic communities need and what they want, and put those together. But we have to be willing, it seems to me, to start from scratch, to start from a kind of a survey, an audit of what those localities need, and set up a vision for the future, a vision for what we think arts in Scotland might look like as an integrated part of making life better, and making life better everywhere, not just in the central belt, but not just in city centres, because everything is going to change in that regard. There's all kinds of audiences that have been largely abandoned because of the changes to touring policy. So, but a counter to that is a kind of a wish, especially in the upper echelons of theatre here, as well as the entertainment business, that somebody flicks a magic switch and puts things back to normal. And of course, there's no such place as normal. We are heading into post-pandemic an extremely tight, extremely contentious public spending environment. The investment of money And so in a way, I always have mixed feelings when I hear, for example, the very welcome news that Aberdeen Arts have been awarded money by the Scottish government this morning. So have Capitol Theatres in Edinburgh. So there is money going in, but it's money going into propping up the infrastructure that existed in March last year, and I'm not sure that infrastructure itself is fit for purpose. And so what I'm desperate for really is for us to take the opportunity of things being shut down to say, okay, what are our resources, what are the skills that we've got, and what are the needs that can be served, and put the two together and in some kind of long-term plan. And I think it's an ideal opportunity to do that. And I'm just less than confident. I'm less confident now than I was in, say, June or July last year that such a thing is going to happen. And so I feel this in a strange way that whenever I see a rescue package being introduced, I have mixed feelings. I think, well, that's great that it's being introduced, but it's preserving in aspic what was there before, and what was there before wasn't necessarily the best it could be.
The thing that struck me about the announcement and other announcements supporting the creative arts is it's very venue based, very focused on the buildings,
Yes.
not focused on the people.
Yeah.
Now, the theatre, along with film and television production, I'm guessing have more people behind the camera and behind the scenes than you see out front. And most of these people are freelancers. They're reliant on individual contracts coming through. They have had no support financially, really, because of the particular vagaries of the furlough regulations. Isn't there a real worry that we're going to lose some of that talent as well to both of the industries? I should say we're having a little bit of a problem at the moment with Peter's feed. It's a bit out of sync. Yeah. So he's making these amazing wonderful points, and his lips aren't moving.
For a while there, Peter was talking to us telepathically.
Yes, which is quite strange.
His messages over.
It's slightly disconcerting, and so we'll try and get that fixed. I'm sorry about that, but sorry, Libby, to get back to what I was saying. Too much focus on venue, not enough focus on people.
Yeah.
What should be the practical things that the Scottish government look at?
Well, Maggie, here's a great example of that. Basically, when Peter was speaking there, I was just thinking what he said. What went before COVID hit was disastrous. Every actor I know is really wanting a different way to be around their work in this nation of ours. It's just not working. Before the COVID pandemic hit, I was at a meeting in the Tron Theatre with, nearly 300 equity members. And the discussion was about the fact that the 5 big employers for actors, so that was National Theatre Scotland, the Lyceum, the Citizens Theatre, Pitlochry, I think it was also Dundee Rep, 5 big employers all started their auditions in London. Mm. So you were getting actors travelling on a train down with the person from the National Theatre Scotland who was going to be auditioning them to London. There was also a discussion about something like RADA. RADA has auditions in Los Angeles and in Spain and in Birmingham, I think, but none in Scotland, not one. So if you've got this great wee kid who's just shown such fantastic talent and you want him to audition for RADA, he's got 5 auditions in London before he can even. The whole thing is London-centric. It's been London-centric for years and years and years. I used to be in a band. We were on the Tube and Jules Holland invited on Claire Grogan, and Claire was basically saying in the 80s, if you take yourself seriously as an artist and stay in Scotland, then you're laughable. If you want to have a career in the arts, you must move to London. And we can't sustain that as a nation. We've got to be owning our own stories here,
So what needs to happen?
I'm sitting.
What needs to happen?
It's funny. I'm sitting here looking at Webster's Theatre right out my window, and because of the building that it's in, it's really struggling to stay open at all before COVID, and I'm sure it will be even worse afterwards. but it's a prime site for the most fantastic art house theatre. The footfall is extraordinary. The theatre that's in there is a beautiful rake with a cracking wee stage. There's a fabulous bar. There's a big room upstairs for rehearsals. It's the most fantastic theatre space lying empty because nobody's financing it.
So the current model doesn't work, okay? Too much
No.
focus on venues and the big venues. Peter's talking about a collective attitude to the arts. I don't know if you're meaning,
Vision.
Peter, actually a collective, you know, in a kind of financial sense. Where should, and as Peter says, money's going to be tight and limited post-pandemic, and sadly, the reality is the arts will not be regarded as crucial because people don't think of the arts as crucial to the well-being economy. And although there's a lot of lip service made by the current Scottish Government to well-being economy, I think it is lip service because I don't think it's backed up by policy or funding. So you've got...
Sorry, Maggie, but you know what? When you say the arts, you might as well be saying the weather.
Well, exactly. Okay, well, let's stick to the theatre then.
Let's just
Stick to theatre.
at the pavilion, or are we talking about the National Theatre Scotland,
right, let's
who
just stick,
bring
let's
most
stick,
of their work to China?
Let's stick to the theatre. So you've got half an hour in front of the Fiona Hislop. What are you going to ask in order to develop this new model that you say is needed and clearly is? And what impact is that going to have? And what difference is that going to make? That's going to make it attractive enough for government to just think differently and outside of the box. Be creative.
I think you've got to integrate the way you think about it has got to be integrated with the way they're already thinking. They're already thinking in terms of what I mentioned. What they do is that they have a kind of a measure of wealth, a measure of well-being, but that does not rely on productivity. That there's a different economic model. The Scottish Government are already well on the way to doing that. So whatever the arts do, it's got to be part of this broader picture of that's to do with health, to do with prisons, to do with education, and an integration of the arts. And it seems to me that the way to do that, first of all, is to do a local audit. Is to say, okay, what does Dumfries and Galloway have? What does Dumfries and Galloway need? Then let's make the same true of every area of Scotland. And that kind of needs-based model for the arts, it seems to me, that's what the way forward looks like. Actually getting there is a very tricky political problem because you have to get past structures of ownership, structures of control, which have existed for a long, long time. Really, we have to bear in mind that the current model of arts councils, of public investment in the arts, came about at the same time as the National Health Service, and in a sense, it's a model of way of doing things which hasn't really altered since then. What's happened to it is that it's turned into a kind of competitive tendering. It's like local authorities. So basically, there's a pot of money, and all the arts organisations compete for it. They compete for the same pot of money, and that brings about an anti-collective mindset, if you like. So instead of matching needs and resources, we assume what resources are and pile in and kind of compete for them. And so there have been many reviews of how, my God, I've taken part in many of them myself, of arts provision and how it works in Scotland over the last 20 years. It's not just the SNP. It predates devolution, some of this stuff. But we have yet to agree a way of doing things that gets past in a sense, great and the good. The theatre boards, which are self-selecting, which are made up of the great and the good, and we are yet to have a democratic and collective way of looking at things. And I know that's useless to say to Fiona Hislop as I've tried in the past. because it doesn't really get you anywhere. And for them, the most pragmatic, the easiest way of funding the arts is fund what's already funded.
Mm-hmm.
Don't make decisions. Keep hands off. The arts is a third rail politically, because
Mm-hmm.
supporting it at all makes you look bad, as
Mm-hmm.
far as many voters are concerned. So therefore, politicians are deeply, deeply reluctant to get their hands dirty, but
Are
they
there any
have to.
models? Are there any models
Yeah, well, do you know,
elsewhere
Maggie, this is
that are
this is
working?
where I think we've all gone wrong here. There's a whole other way of looking at this. I think Peter's right. It has to be coming from a completely different angle. And what the definition of an madman's doing the same thing over and over again. These audits haven't worked ever, and the reason for that, I think, is because basically what happens with the arts is, like, I went to the Arts Council meeting way back in the 80s when they got rid of Wildcat. So there was two men who were totally passionate, the two Davids, Dave McClellan and Dave Anderson. Now, none of those guys were going to go on and be a bus conductor or a geography teacher. They were just going to keep on keeping on doing what they were doing, because that's who they were as people. They had that passion, they had that drive. And basically, they found a private platform with Colin Beattie at Oran Moore, and the play Pie and a Pint has produced more theatre in the whole of Europe than ever happened before. So for me, the idea that you identify an area that doesn't have arts activity, or a fantastic architect's plan for a great building, or no money's over here in Poso, or see without that individual, see if you don't recognise, you need to find people who are totally driven. I mean, Peter, you and I went to the Edinburgh Festival all those years ago in the 80s with Redheads and came back with money. You can't stop people's footfall. Now, I've never wanted to see the arts as a business, right? But see if it comes to it. I personally know a whole group of people that can create theatre that has a broad base appeal that would have people spending their money coming to the theatre. The amount of things that I've been involved in where I've done it with, fellow thesps who really care about stories that are radical and changing things, mostly through black comedy and political satire. The amount of people that have came to those shows for the first time, having stepped into a theatre, and said to me, if I knew this is what theatre was, I would be here every week. I
Okay,
had
that's
no idea
a
I could
great
come
point,
to theatre
Libby, because
and love it.
don't we just need to start with people younger? Don't we need to put more of an emphasis on the power of theatre and drama in schools? There isn't a nationwide curriculum on education for drama in schools. It's strong in some parts of the country, traditionally the northeast, not anywhere else. Theatre arts in schools, I think, doesn't exist anymore. When I was at school, theatre companies were constantly coming to school and putting on performances in your hall, so you were imbued. I went to the Dundee Rep regularly with my mum. A wee lassie from a housing estate in Dundee went to the Dundee Rep regularly with my mum. My mum, working class woman, when she was grown up, was at the Dundee Rep every Tuesday night without fail. So we came up in a family who believed in the theatre, and our family have gone on to make careers out of that in some respects. But do we need to start that? Is that one of the things? So the collective idea, understanding the needs. Libby's talking about the passion of individuals, and I know dozens of individual theatre makers, admittedly most down south, who aren't subsidised by anybody, who have that passion. So do we need to really start re-educating the public about the importance of theatre and how it can change?
We need a superstructure for the arts. I mean, and again, I'm sorry for talking politically and talking in terms of governmental terms, but this is in a sense of the trap we're all in. But Libby's point is brilliant, because it's fundamentally, it's about people and audiences, and it's about getting governments the hell out of the way. It's basically it's about facilitating a communication that people would queue up to do. The audiences would come. People would do the shows. In the sense, the whole point of any artistic infrastructure from government or from anyone else or from local government is to make it easier to do shows. And we have a situation where we have the amount of money, and it's not just money, because there was a survey done by Equity, the Actors Union, way back at the beginning in the noughties, which was saying that twice as much public money was now being spent on theatre in Scotland in 2007 than it was in 2000. It was in 1990, but the number of performances had stayed exactly
Yes.
the same. So in other words, all the extra money had gone to employ people whose job was to raise money, whose job was to fill in forms, whose job is and this is this is the difficulty of pandemic planning, and absolutely what you were saying about buildings as opposed to people is because the buildings are easier to fund. The bureaucracies are easier to fund because their salaries are already there. And the people who actually make shows, the writers, the actors, the technicians, the designers, the directors, none of them are on salary. None of them. And it's like,
It's true.
I mean, I
So
feel
true.
comparatively lucky because I'm self-employed and have made in previous years a reasonable amount of money. So I've got some my universal basic income, if you like, of my percentage of my previous self-employed earnings, and those are there. And I'm going, in a strange way, if it wasn't for the madness of the pandemic, this is the most liberated I've been artistically as a writer that I've ever been. But as a theatre person, it's a nightmare.
Universal basic
it's
income would make a big difference then, wouldn't it, to the sector?
Oh,
It would allow.
huge difference.
Yes. Yeah. So
And
that's first on the list. So I'm picking up universal basic income. Government get out of the way. We could say that about a lot of things.
But also,
And
Maggie,
let people do shows.
but also rethinking what shows are for. What is storytelling? I mean,
Yes.
Peter and I have both got a background in community arts, and I've always had a career that's ran tandem with workshops and teaching and acting. So it's actually looking at what the stories are for, and it's not about celebrity. It's not about fame. It's not about none of that's what stories for. Stories about, reminding us that we're not alone, that we are literally connected, and there is no hierarchy in truth because we're all the same. So, the celebrity is the opposite of creativity. So it's actually really, I call it unvelcroing that myth that this has got anything to do with becoming a star and being, in front of an audience.
And let's
This is about
face it, the
self-expression.
pandemic is going to
Absolutely.
throw up stories. It is going to be a rich source of creativity. That idea of connecting to people is central to what we're going through in the pandemic.
It's a rich, as Libby says, the whole point of community arts, community theatre, is that we use our theatre skills to facilitate other people telling their stories. And that has been true of the work that we did years ago with local community drama groups. But it's also true of like the Citizens Theatre has a brilliant community engagement, or at least it used to have, and it still does quite a lot online. It still keeps going. And I've done online workshops with kids, writers workshops, and all these things. But but as Libby says, it's all to do with connecting people. And theatre is a way of connecting people, and that's what everyone right now is so desperate for, is finding a way of connecting with other people, and whether it's in their local communities, or whether it's in spaces, or whatever it is, and also waiting for the weather to get better. We can't help that.
And let's face it, telling stories is at the centre, really, of our humanity, isn't it? And in a Scottish context too, that sitting around the fire, telling tales is something we intuitively react to.
Yeah.
So are you concerned at all that with theatres being dark for so long, that people in Scotland will have gotten out of the habit of going to the theatre?
Yes.
Or when they open, will there be a flood of us desperate to get back in a dark room?
I think it'll be a bit of both. I think there'll be some people who simply can't wait to get back into a theatre, and if they have to wear a mask, they'll be fine with that. Temperature checks, they'll be fine with that. Injections, they'll be fine with that. COVID testing, they'll be fine with that. There'll be some people who will think that's a total faff and they'd rather stay home and watch the telly. So there, which of course was made by theatre people. But anyway, so I think that there's going to be a whole reinvention that's going to have to happen. I think there is going to be a big splash. I mean, whether it happens this next Christmas, with panto season again, or it might be that things might happen this summer. We don't know. We can't tell. And this is the difficulty that theatres are in. It's impossible to plan. It's impossible because a theatre show.
What's your thought? Do you think
happen.
the Edinburgh Festival and Fringe will go ahead this year?
I think something will go ahead. I'm not sure in what form it will go ahead.
Well, to be honest, let's face it, the Fringe needs a good look at anyway. So this might be something positive.
Yes, but the things, but again, this year. But then, see, this is again where, and this is the banging in the head against the brick wall, is strategic planning for saying, okay, let's make the Edinburgh Festival in 2021 a showcase for for performance and community engagement in Scotland. Let's do that.
Let's do that. Right.
Decision.
I'm with you on that.
Body. But
Okay,
we can't
that would be great.
Let's do that. It doesn't work like that.
By the positivity, despite what you've been going through as practitioners in the theatre and the ideas, and that's kind of what we need. So I'm going to just move on to something else that's possibly positive in this world of bad news, and that is Wednesday's inauguration of Joe Biden. He finds himself in the unique position of a Democratic president who will control both the House and the Senate. That hasn't happened for a very long time. He could therefore go nuts. Now, he's not going to stand for a second term because he's going to be too old. So he doesn't have to worry about that. And traditionally, a president's first 4 years are a bit cautious, and then they go for the big legacy, get out in the second term. So we know he's going to overturn some of the more ridiculous executive orders quickly. But what do you think in Biden's first 100 days will be what marks out his presidency as an indication of what's coming? Either of you can take that question.
Well, it'll always to do with the virus. It has to be to do with the virus. It has to be to do with a properly national federal vaccination program. Because one of the things that Trump did, because he's incompetent, lazy, and stupid, but one of the things he did was to abandon all the states to compete with each other for the resources. And of course, America is a hugely rich country, but one of the reasons they've had a death rate almost as bad as ours is that the states have been left to compete as opposed to cooperate. I think his biggest task is to get cooperation going, happening for the whole of the United States. I think that's the first year. Is get the vaccination program done and work on reviving the American economy. In a sense, strangely, the inward turn, the inward-looking turn of Trump mania is going to continue in a strange way. I think that in a way that Biden will have no option in the first 100 days, in the first year, or the first 18 months, just how long he'll get to govern until the 2022 elections. Anyway, he will try to make things work that didn't work before.
The domestic agenda will have to be. That's a good thing, though, is it not, Libby? If America decides not to be the world's policeman and takes a bit of a foot off the gas of foreign policy and concentrates domestically, isn't that a good thing?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, isn't America fascinating? Talk about soap opera. My dad used to always say, the best in the human being can be found in America, and the very worst of the human being can be found in America. Again, I think that idea of an idea to leave its source. There's something about the guilt of being the plunderer in the American that makes them justify survival of the fittest to the end. They kind of but it's right and true that you've got to be the guy that if you can, you do, as opposed to see what happens. I think Biden, what is it with these old white men, I'm glad Kamala Harris is in the background because, these presidents, you wouldn't be allowed to drive a corporation bus at that age in Glasgow, But I think whatever else it is happens, he's got to make a hell of a speech on Wednesday. He's got to make a hell of a speech.
Yeah.
I
don't find his rhetoric quite as inspiring as some people do. I think he's a bit couthy. So much so I asked someone, did he have a Scottish granny hidden away somewhere? But apparently he doesn't. Irish.
Maybe couthy's okay. Maybe Toothy's okay, but the only thing that annoys me about Biden is when he feels the need to do a wee sprint up to the mic. You're like, you don't need to sprint. I don't need to see you sprint.
Yeah.
It's fine. We know you're
And
an old
joking
bloke.
aside, I mean, obviously today is the first day that people were being called upon to demonstrate across the country. All 50 state capitals are now surrounded by barriers and screens and anti-terrorist
Extraordinary.
stuff, which is really sad. I mean, that's really, really awful. And the slightly worrying thing is they've kicked off the alt-right groups off mainstream social media, but they haven't gone away. They've just gone underground. They've gone into the dark web, and they're still spreading their poison. And apparently, Mike Pence now is almost as unpopular with them as Nancy Pelosi. So that's kind of interesting.
And it's
Trump's obviously not going to the
watch Mike
inauguration.
Pompeo.
He's staying in his golf resort in Florida. He's not coming to Scotland, so we won't see him on Wednesday.
Or Janie Godley.
Or Janie Godley. Well, just as we get to the end of the programme, moving from Trump, one loser, to another loser slightly closer to home, is the announcement that Richard Leonard is stepping down as Labour leader. Somebody said Richard who to me the other day. Actually, do you think it matters who takes over Labour in Scotland? Is it going to make any difference to Labour's position in Scotland in terms of their impact in the polls or their impact on the independence debate? Libby, what do you think?
I have this fantasy that one day in an independent Scotland, there'll be a proper Labour Party. The kind of Labour Party that my dad was devoted to, the kind of Labour Party that we all imagined when we were first starting our jobs, when we were 17 and 18, 19, we were like, well, Labour, what they stand for? I'm a working class girl going into a career, So I have this fantasy that in an independent Scotland, there'll be a return to politics that mean that the left wing actually stand up against right wing policies that favour the few and don't have enough equality. So yeah, to a certain extent, I think it is important. I mean, it was so hard to thole that Labour Party during 2014. I mean, it was so sad watching
That
what they
Labour
were willing
Party
to
is
do.
still here. That isn't going to change, is it? Say, for example, Sarwar takes the leadership. He's not going to produce that Labour Party.
We're looking to the next Labour leader
Party that supports independence.
Apparently, Labour for Yes is still the quickest and fastest growing independence grassroots movement. Peter, you were trying to come in.
Yes, and but I think that there will be an interesting Labour Party leadership once they get the constitutional issue is just such poison for them. It's such poison. It's electoral poison, and they have to get past that. But my feeling is they'll only get past that. But once a vote has happened and once it's already on its way, I'm looking forward to their participation. There's some very good people and some very interesting people who are still attached to Labour,
Peter.
who are unionists, but who will accept. I'm absolutely sure that if the independence is coming, if it's on its way, I'm looking forward to getting them on board and having a conversation with them, because we'll need some of those people as well to make the country work.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I've never really understood why the Labour Party in Scotland are so wedded to the union. Because in an independent Scotland, the chance of a Labour Party or something resembling a left-wing socialist party would have, if not the balance of power all the time, would certainly be an important force. And I've never really understood that. We're getting towards the end of our hour. It's been a great discussion. I think we've come up with a wonderful plan for the theatre in Scotland. Let's hope important people were listening today. Just before we leave, the one other thing I wanted to mention about the theatre industry, of course, is the debacle we've been having in Scotland over equity. So for people who are not in the industry, compulsory redundancies in Scotland, I believe the Northern Ireland branch has been closed while jobs are being created in England. Is this, Libby, just another example of what you were saying earlier about being London-centric?
Yes, it is.
And how is this going to affect individuals in the industry in Scotland?
It's a total disaster, and thank God, we've got these brilliant individuals like Kirsten McLean and Andy Clark and Julie Coombs and Tamdeen Burns, who are really keeping us up to date with what's going on. There's absolutely no excuse to do that compulsory redundancy of Lorne Boswell, absolutely none. And the idea that, the Scottish branch is more, it's getting more populated in terms of its employment than the Midlands branch. Well, basically, they both should be looked after more. And for Northern Ireland, it's amazing what the connections that we've made there just with this conversation. But it's not an accident that Paul Fleming, the General Secretary, is a Brexiteer as well. And you just feel, again, that thing of Scotland being treated like a region, and more London-centric stuff,
Yeah. But it's the impact it's going to have on individuals that is so damaging. Yes, Peter.
Well, I think that there's a very. I've been looking at the complaint with the Equity, the Scottish Council has sent to the London branch, which is to say that that Scottish members, when they joined Equity, there's an implied contract under Scottish law between those members and a certain level of representation, the county representation. Now, to put this in context, there are only 3 full-time Equity officers to represent Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And of course the entertainment industry is based in London, largely, but we are funded differently, we're organised differently. It is insane to treat Scotland as if, on a purely population terms, as if it was a region of England, and that is the basic rationale that is being applied. Unfortunately, Paul Fleming, who is the General Secretary of Equity, was elected very, very recently. On the platform of looking after regions, incidentally, but the problem is that the Equity Council in London are going to find it very difficult not to back, because if he says back me or sack me, they're going to back him.
Yeah, but that whole point, and we'll finish on that. Yeah. This idea that because you treat Scotland in anything relating to its size of population is just treating it as a region of England is exactly Absolutely. The point that we are here to fight and argue about, is what's going to lie behind the new distribution of the UK Prosperity Fund, and just all adds to the importance of us getting our referendum.
Yes,
came out today to say that 50...
very briefly. Very briefly, it's worse for Northern Ireland. There's going to be no Northern Ireland office at all, but this is also the week where Scotland quietly, where Mike Russell and Simon Coveney, the Irish Foreign Minister, quietly put together a protocol about Scotland and Ireland and future cooperation.
Yeah,
and
who knows? The north of Ireland may be unifying with the rest of that island quicker than we get our independence. Yeah. Things are moving in that direction as well. Okay, I have to finish it there. That's been a fantastic hour. Just as always to the viewers, asking you to remember that it costs money to keep Broadcasting Scotland running, and we'd like to start employing people to make more programmes so that as we get nearer to the election and in what could be a referendum year, we are front and centre of covering independent news for you. So please support us. Log on to www.broadcastingscotland.scot/register to pledge, donate, add to the crowdfunder and have your voice heard. It's been an absolute pleasure today. I hope you all listen in to Uncle Joe's speech on Wednesday and find out what's in charge for us all. Thanking my guests, Peter and Libby. That's been a fantastic hour, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Catalans, the Basques, the Galicians in the Basque.
An independent future for Scotland.
How quickly do you think a referendum can be arranged?
Best practice demands that it should be 6 months.
Just looking at the overall share numbers for Scotland at the moment, the SNP 46.4%.